He was just 5'1" and sold off like livestock at age 13. But this unwanted boy would rise to become one of the most famous men in the world. You know his name, but you've never heard his true story until now. The autumn leaves gently swayed to and fro among the oak trees that lined the muddy banks of Mulberry Creek, which struggled to contain the big waters roaring like thunder over the rocks. There had been fallen weather over the past few days, but now the skies were breaking as a new moon peeped through the heavens above. The storm had finally passed. In the distance, a small one-room log cabin stood at the edge of a cornfield, and despite the midnight hour, the modest homestead was busy with activity. Through the home's tiny window, the flames from a freshly stoked fireplace could be seen dancing as a shadow of a man hurriedly moved about the room with purpose. Calloway Daniel was the man's name. The lines on his weathered face told of the many trials he had faced during his life. His grandfather had taken the long journey across the ocean to America and valiantly fought in the Revolutionary War. And for his services, the government awarded him a small patch of fertile land where the small cabin now stood. And here, 2 generations of his offspring were born and lived out their lives. And now, Calloway paced worriedly in the cabin that his grandfather had built. He had sent word for the granny doctor 2 days ago, but all of the creeks were impassable, and by now it appeared obvious no help was coming. There on the bed laid Calloway's wife. Now, the poor woman had been in the throes of childbirth for over the past 10 hours. Yet something wasn't right. Her husband had done all he knew how to do, but now she had become too weak to even drink water. With all of the strength that she had left in her tired body, she gave one final push, and in that moment, a baby boy named Jasper took his first breath in this world. Yet, he would never know the mother who had gave her life to bring him into this world, because his mama died that very night before she ever held her son for the first time. Thus, the genesis of a cruel childhood for young Jasper began. People didn't have the luxury of grieving back in those days, and only a short time passed before Jasper's father remarried. Locals said it was for the best. After all, a man had to have a woman to tend to the house and all those young'uns, while he did all he could to put food on the table. And within a decade, 10 kids were born to this new marriage. Now, over the course of history, it's true that there have been many good women who honorably stepped in to lovingly raise a child that wasn't their own flesh and blood. Yet, this wasn't the case when it came to Jasper's stepmother. As the boy grew, she made it clear in every way that he would forever be a second-class citizen as long as he lived in her house. Jasper was only given hand-me-down clothes, full of holes and patches, once they had been completely worn out by her other boys. And while his father was away at work, she neglected him, and many times she thrashed him for trivial reasons, with switches that she made him pick from a weeping willow tree, and assured him that he would never be as good as her own offspring. And Jasper knew better than to complain out loud, but many times as he laid in bed at night, he dreamed of what it might have been like to have known his birth mother, to have felt her embrace, and to have felt safe in her arms. You see, children were seen, but not heard in those days. They weren't allowed to have feelings. There were too many real problems going on for their parents. And for Jasper, things finally came to a head when he was a teenager. His father had been powerful sick for months, and now he had pneumonia, and sadly, he died. Just like that, the boy became a stranger in his own home. And as bad as things were before, the death of his father removed all barriers to the true desires of his stepmother. Now, she could do what she had long wanted to, and that was to get rid of this unwanted child. And at just 13 years of age, she sold the motherless boy into a life of servitude to whoever would take him.
Give someone you love the gift of old-fashioned storytelling. 4 books for the young and old alike that will make your heart smile. Click the link below to order your copy of the Appalachian Storyteller today.
Thus began a period of time where Jasper found himself sleeping in a new place every few weeks. Poor Southerners didn't have the means to feed an extra mouth for long periods of time, and even God-fearing religious charitable folks turned a blind eye when it came to the teenage boy. You see, there were no jobs to speak of, and the only work available for Jasper was toiling away from sunup to sundown as a farmhand. But this was something he just wasn't cut out for. Standing at just 5 foot 1 inches tall, he proved to be no match for the strength needed to tote hay or corn, or to wrestle with hogs, or fighting with stubborn mules that refused to pull a plow. The animals would just take one look at the puny boy, and after sizing him up, no, they wouldn't pay any mind to his commands. Nary would they budge an inch, no matter how Jasper pleaded. Because of this, each and every farm he found himself on, the poor boy would quickly be given away to someone else after they realized he couldn't earn his keep. Finally, in 1859, a preacher took pity on the lad and gave him a place to stay on his farm. The preacher's name was Reverend, who happened to own a general store and allowed the young fella to deliver groceries and clean up around the store. In return, he gave the youngster food and a place to sleep in the hayloft at his farm with several of his slaves. So it was. Jasper spent 6 days a week running errands and sweeping up that general store, and occasionally he would knock over a jar and break something when Reverend would threaten to put the boy out if he didn't shape up fast. But like everything else in those days, the store closed on Sunday. And back at the homestead, all of the workers enjoyed the day by fishing down at the creek, playing music on homemade instruments, or spinning yarns about the adventures and travels of their youth. For his part, Jasper would spend the morning down at the church, listening to Reverend deliver a fiery sermon about the coming of the Lord and the perils of hell. And after that service concluded, the pair would ride the wagon down the dusty road to the homestead. In fact, that ride would become so dusty that a fella's throat would quickly become parched, and soon he would need something to knock the dust out of his guzzle. But it just so happened that Reverend knew of the perfect spot to quench that powerful thirst. Just outside of his farm, there existed a cave that prying eyes didn't know about. It had a natural spring flowing through it, and the water was some of the best tasting and sweetest water that could be found in this part of America. It flowed at a steady 56 degrees from the limestone cave and was completely free of impurities. But as it turns out, Reverend couldn't tell you what that water tasted like, since he had never had a single drop of it in its natural form. And that's because the preacher had a hidden whiskey still located at the mouth of the cave, where he made some of the finest whiskey in the entire county. All of a sudden, the teens started looking forward to those Sunday trips home from church the entire week, and it was there, standing in that clear water of the cave, that Jasper found his unlikely calling in life. He became a willing student, learning at the feet of Reverend Call's head distiller, a black man named Nearest Green, studying his techniques to the potent sour corn mash liquor. With the preacher being such a busy man, and seeing that at least the young boy hadn't broken the still yet, he began to see some promise in the lad. After all, the youngster might not be much count for physical work, but he sure had a knack when it came to the manufacturing of stump water. Soon, Jasper began spending most of his spare time down at the cave, working the old copper kettle with Nearest, stirring the mash, adding the yeast to the wort, monitoring the temperature, distilling the alcohol, and aging the final product in logs. After a while, Jasper had learned that famous Lincoln County distilling technique from Nearest, which improved the taste by filtering the whiskey through sugar maple charcoal to remove all impurities and smoothing the taste, and then by aging the finished product in charred oak barrels, giving it a spicy charcoal oak, vanilla, and caramel flavor. Reverend Call was so impressed with the boy's dedication and the methods that he'd learned that he remarked, "Jasper, son, you might not ever be the jack of all trades, but dagnabbit, boy, you're the bona fide jack of whiskey." And in that moment, an iconic American brand was born. Well, how about that? Have you figured out who Jasper was? Did you guess it? That's right. The scrawny, unwanted boy named Jasper Nathan Daniel would become one of the most iconic men in history and the legend behind the old number 7 Jack Daniel's Tennessee whiskey. That's right. Young Jack started his brewing career at the tender age of 13 years old and began hauling wagon loads of it to the nearest city of Huntsville, Alabama, where folks couldn't get enough of it. Soon, the word spread locally about this premium liquor, and several times, Jack was robbed at gunpoint by thieves, and other times, revenuers would confiscate all his goods. Undeterred, the boy pressed forward, and during the years of the war between the states, the up-and-coming prodigy would sell his whiskey to soldiers on both sides of the conflict. And at the conclusion of the war, those men returned to their home states, sharing stories about the best-tasting Who Shot John they had ever tasted, while other whiskey men were selling their product in secret. To avoid those revenuers, Jack was a true visionary. He saw the future potential of his whiskey being shipped by railroad all across America. So, in 1866, 20-year-old Jack Daniel applied for and received the first government license to operate a legal distillery in American history. And because of the charcoal filtering and the 7-year aging technique Jack used during the manufacturing process, the government even created a new special class of liquor called Tennessee whiskey.
Hey guys, JD Phillips here from the Appalachian Storyteller, and we're here today in Lynchburg, Tennessee, at the site where Jack Daniels first started making that famous whiskey. Right here behind me, the cave, he had his still set up right here, and he used that water, which stayed 56 degrees all year round. It filtered through the limestone cave and made the water really pure, and to this very day, they still make every drop of Jack Daniels with that water right there.
That's right. Jack Daniel's Tennessee whiskey was now being mentioned alongside legendary brands such as Jim Beam's Kentucky Bourbon and Buffalo Trace. And while those brands employed an army of salesmen who traveled America marketing their product, Jack always let the taste of his whiskey sell itself. But perhaps Jack's most genius invention was the bottle that his whiskey was sold in. You see, during the late 1800s, half of the population couldn't read or write, so manufacturers would go to great lengths to sell their products by using visual symbolism. For instance, tobacco shops always placed a wooden statue of an Indian outside of their store, and barber shops placed candy cane barber poles outside. And when it came to liquor, the competition was fierce. So manufacturers tried to create logos that men could visually identify. Names like Old Crow, which had a flying crow on the label, or Yellowstone Bourbon, which had a picture of majestic falls on the label. But one thing all these liquors had in common was that they were all sold in round bottles. And here Jack saw his chance, so he would only sell his whiskey in square bottles. This symbolism was ingenious. After all, a round bottle surely meant that the maker had cut corners to make the product, and a square bottle meant that you were assured you were getting a fair and square deal for your hard-earned money. In 1904, Jack took his Tennessee whiskey to the World's Fair in St. Louis, where he took home the gold medal. It was the first of 7 gold medals that it would receive. Suddenly, Jack Daniel's whiskey was the most sought-after liquor on planet Earth. Now, in 1906, Jack came to work one day, and he couldn't get his safe open at the office. And so after trying a few times, he got frustrated, and he kicked the safe. Well, kicking that safe was pretty costly because, you see, it broke his toe, and he had an infection set in, which eventually led to the amputation of his toe, later on his foot, and then his leg. And in 1911, he died. And here he is. He's buried here in Lynchburg, Tennessee. And you'll notice the 2 chairs in front of his grave here. Well, the story goes, well, first of all, Jack never married his entire life. No kids, no wife. But he was quite the bachelor, walking around with his fancy hat and his fancy cane and his fancy overcoat. The women loved him. He was only 5'1", but the women absolutely loved him. And they said he had a girlfriend for every day of the week. And it was rumored that he couldn't get all of the girlfriends to the funeral at the same time. So he put these chairs out here so they could come visit him. Jack Daniels bought his first whiskey still when he was 13 years old for the price of $25. It would take him 3 years to pay that money back. Today, Jack Daniel's distillery is worth a staggering $6.5 billion. Isn't that something? The unwanted boy who was sold to the highest bidder as a child would one day grow up to stand only 5'1" tall on his tiptoes, but he would one day become a giant in the whiskey business. Today, Jack Daniel's Tennessee whiskey is still the top-selling whiskey in the world, and the company is worth a staggering $6.5 billion. I'd like to leave you with this one final thought. Despite the fame Jack achieved in his lifetime, it's said that he rarely, if ever, let a single drop of his whiskey touch his own lips. He never married or had any kids, despite living in a massive estate in Lynchburg, Tennessee, where he hosted annual picnics for folks in the community. Late in his life, Jack professed Christianity and turned his life over to the Lord, and became a member of the local Primitive Baptist Church, and sold his whiskey business to his nephew. As I was researching and writing this story, several times I kept thinking back to the mother that Jack never knew. I like to think that throughout his life, that somewhere, Jack's mama was looking down and smiling at the man her baby boy became. So there you go, my friends. In the words of a childhood hero of mine, now you know the rest of the story about an unwanted boy named Jasper who would grow up to become the absolute king of Tennessee whiskey. Let me know what you think about his story in the comments below. And as always, be sure to like and subscribe for more true stories from Appalachia's past.